Afternoon, folks. Welcome to the Daily Politics. 3,500 troops are now being drafted in to help with security for the London Olympics. It's a last-minute measure after the private contractor Group 4 failed to recruit enough staff. The Home Secretary offers 10,000 Olympic tickets to soldiers' families.
If they can get
We'll have the latest on this omni-shambles.
Have David Cameron's relations with his backbenchers turned ugly? After the biggest Conservative rebellion on Lord's reform, we'll be hearing from the man David Cameron beat to become leader of the party.
Britain's canals are taken out of state control and given to a charitable trust. Is this the big society in action?
And can the traditional election night excitement live on, despite calls for counts to take place the next day? We'll hear from the Electoral Commission.
So that's coming up in the next half hour. With us for the duration, senior Conservative backbencher, professional troublemaker now, David Davis. He's got no chance of getting into the House of Lords. Anyway, welcome back to the Daily Politics.
Some things don't change.
You and me both. Let's kick off with the news that William Hague has ordered a comprehensive audit of EU powers and how they impact on life in the United Kingdom.
Yes, the Foreign Secretary is due to make a statement to the House of Commons in the next half an hour. Well, David Davis, is this William Hague showing a bit of ankle to Tory MPs, making them feel better about Europe?
Well, I guess it might be, but like so many European things, it could deliver rather more than is expected. I mean, if it's a real audit, I mean, it'll show all sorts of handicaps, problems and burdens coming from Europe.
But surely he must know that, and that's why he's doing it, isn't he?
Well, I don't know. I mean, you know, I asked for this when I was Europe Minister many, many years ago. The whole place went into meltdown when just at the point of being asked. I said, you can't do that, Minister. And I said, why not? It's just a private thing. Oh, it'll leak, they said. Well, this will be leaking for weeks, I think.
But do you think it will bring on side some of the Tory backbenchers who've been calling for repatriation of powers and a referendum at some stage once renegotiation has taken place? Because I presume if you're doing a comprehensive audit, it'll be a stepping stone to seeing what isn't working and what's not good value.
Well, I think that's right. I think two things will come out of it. One is, actually, the people who want out or want a renegotiation will be energised by it, not appeased by it. But what it could also give them is a useful negotiating template, if you like. You know, this is the sort of thing we want fixed. So it could be quite a rational thing, but I think more likely it'll raise the temperature.
2014 is when it's going to be concluded, conveniently a year before the general election. How do you think the Liberal Democrats are? I mean, presumably it's got their agreement.
But when in 2014, well, I assume we have their agreement, but when in 2014, is this going to be before or after the Euro elections, in which we are going to do so brilliantly well?
Ah, yes. It doesn't say specifically when in 2014. It just says that, yeah, that's true. The timing could be very important.
Think of the combustible combination of a bad performance in the Euro elections and this together.
What would you be hoping for?
Well, I'm not hoping for anything. I'm hoping for a rational outcome. But I think it could be quite difficult to manage.
Is the Foreign Office going to do the audit?
Yes, well, it must be. I mean, if he's standing there...
Would you trust the Foreign Office to... I mean, hasn't Mr Hague gone native in the Foreign
You could
Office?
just stop with, would I trust the Foreign Office?
Well, the Foreign Office is in charge of EU things, isn't it? Europe
it would have to be Whitehall-wide. You can't. I mean, because, you know, you've got all sorts of things. You've got trade policy, you've got all this sort of various employment law stuff. Everybody's going to have their finger in it.
Well...
You know, there was a tourist walking down Whitehall, and he went up to the policeman and he said, "Excuse me, officer, could you tell me which side the Foreign Office is on?" And the policeman said, "That's a very good question, sir."
But to the right, on this case, if you're going down towards the Houses of Parliament. Now, it's time for our daily quiz, which today is all about UFOs. Yes, the MOD has released its latest batch of documents about UFO sightings. The secret files show that the MOD launched a lengthy investigation in the 1990s into whether such unidentified aerial phenomena were not of this Earth, and if so, what their purpose was. So, according to the MOD, what was the purpose of these apparent UFO visits? Was it A, military reconnaissance, B, scientific exploration, or C, tourism? At the end of the show, David will attempt to give us the correct answer. The truth is out there.
I think they're just queuing for Olympic tickets.
I'm told they had John Redwood as special advisor. So, just 2 weeks to go until the greatest show on earth gets underway in London. Yes, the 2012 Olympics are getting set to go, and the man in charge, Seb Coe, is urging us to get behind the games. I'm going to New York. The gleaming new stadiums, or stadia, if you're a stickler for Latin, are all built. Tens of thousands of crisp new Olympic tickets are arriving on doormats, especially if you're an MP, and Britain's athletes are limbering up for the great event. But we Brits, being who we are, We're never far from having a good old whinge about something. And of course the Olympics are no exception. So Joko, what have we got to moan about today?
Just about everything, actually, Andrew. There's a fair amount of complaining about the Games around today, mostly over security issues. 3,500 troops are on standby because the contractor G4S may not be able to provide the guards it had previously guaranteed, despite being paid £300 million. And the Chief Inspector of Borders has warned that border officers with basic training are manning immigration desks at Heathrow. This, on top of complaints earlier this week from the Select Committee Chairman, Keith Vaz, who said queuing was so bad, people were left stacked in corridors. And commuters aren't very happy, as junctions 2 and 3 of the M4, the main motorway link from London to the airport, will not reopen today as planned. And Transport for London are working on contingencies if it's not reopened before the Olympics. I'd like to know what those are. In East London, residents lost their High Court challenge to stop the MOD stationing surface-to-air missiles on the roof of their tower block inside the Olympics Park. Some MPs are unhappy that Heineken will be the official beer rather than a British brand. And the Olympic organisers have banned food retailers on site, except McDonald's, from selling chips unless they are to be served with fish. But there are 4 MPs who aren't complaining. Members of the Culture Select Committee, including Chairman John Whittingdale, have accepted tickets from BT for the men's 100-metre final. Well, in the last half an hour, the Home Secretary, Theresa May, has been answering questions in the House of Commons on Olympic security. Here's what she had to say.
As the venue security exercises got underway, concerns have arisen about the ability of G4S to deliver the required number of guards for all Olympics venues and within the timescales available. And the Defence Secretary and I, along with other ministers, have been constantly monitoring this situation and the security contracts over many months. And in consultation with LOCOG and G4S, we have now agreed that it would be prudent to deploy additional military support to provide greater reassurance. I have therefore requested additional MOD support, and the Defence Secretary has authorised the deployment of a further 3,500 military personnel. This will bring the total number of military personnel from supporting the safety and security of who are supporting the safety and security of games in a variety of roles to 17,000, including the military deployed on wider functions than venue security.
That was Theresa May, the Home Secretary, answering an urgent question, as they call them, in the Commons on Olympic security, just over half an hour ago this morning. Now, we're joined by former Security Minister, Admiral Alan West, and by the Conservative MP, Patrick Mercer. And we should say that we did ask to speak to a Home Office Minister, but I was totally surprised none was available. I mean,
They're manning.
I understand it.
They're manning at the Olympic Park.
So, Alan West, you can't get into the country because Heathrow's blocked. Even if you get through Heathrow, you can't get into London because the M4's closed. And even if you've managed another way in, the security companies fail to provide security guards. What could possibly go wrong?
Well, I must say this latest thing with G4S is surprising and worrying, I think. I don't think it'll affect the security of the Games. That's been taken care of.
Well, we brought in the military.
Government have sorted that out because the military are in there. But I think we do need to look at this quite carefully because G4S are used very widely, and I think they've actually, it's a triumph of optimism by them. They think they can do things and provide things, and they haven't done it.
Can I just...
And they should have let us know before. This is too close to the Games, really.
Yeah, last time I looked, 2 things. One, it's not a surprise that the Olympics are opening at the end of this month. I think we've known for quite a while, years and years. And there are 2.5 million people unemployed in this country. Yeah. Why could they not get the guards on time?
I think the first thing I'd say is alarm bells, I think, should have gone off earlier when, about 2 years ago, it was quite clear the number of people required for Olympic security was going to be much bigger than had been predicted. And G4S were quite clearly having difficulty in actually vetting the people, making sure they had clearances, getting them, recruiting them, ensuring they were available for use. And that's why we agreed that 13,500 military would be. That's a lot. It was going to be a blue.
So it was originally always going to be 13,500
Well,
military,
no, originally it was going to try and be a blue Games, but it quite clear that couldn't happen when they realised by police and security companies.
Right.
But then it became quite clear that wasn't the case. And at that stage, I believe they should have been all over them like a rash, saying, right, if they can't deliver here, if we need, as we get close to the Games, to make absolutely certain they can, And I think they should have been absolutely drilling down and making sure, because quite clearly the company kept saying, yes, we can, yes, we can. And there at the last moment they can't. And that's not something. To suddenly find 3,500 extra, 17,000, Theresa May mentioned. There are also 2,000 extra as contingency. That's 19,000 Army, Navy, Air Force personnel. That's a tenth of our military.
If they're watching in Buenos Aires, now would be a good time. That was the time. That would be a time. Maybe we should just have brought our military, fantastic military that this country has, just brought them in from the start.
Well, in the all-party parliamentary group,
well,
I published this yesterday. It's the all-party parliamentary group on which was we looked at Olympic security. And we did. I discussed it with Lord West and with David Davis. In fact, we published it sometime. We published it yesterday, but we've been looking for some time.
Did you see this coming?
We identified a problem with G4S, yes, and in fairness to the government, they have therefore started the military contingency planning. But the bitter irony of this, of course, is that only last week we were hearing that these very soldiers, and my old regiment, who are now got P45s in their back pockets, have just been told that they are to come from Belfast to lose their post-Northern Ireland tour, I'll rephrase that, that's dating me, their post-Afghanistan tour leave, and are to carry out Olympic security around the Olympic tennis.
And then we'll fire them.
Oh, yes, and then they'll be fired after that. Yes, absolutely. So,
it's a great way to treat people who've risked their lives for this country, isn't it?
All I'd say is this. Thank God that we've got an army, a navy and an air force that can react to government plans at short notice and capably, because very shortly we aren't going to have those on current planning.
That is the key point. That actually, you know, I'm on record as saying I think we've cut the forces too far.
Absolutely.
And these people, you know, they're brilliantly trained in their initial training. They can turn their hand to anything, whether it's to do with foot and mouth, flooding, Olympic Games, fighting our enemies. And we need to think very carefully before we drive down the numbers available for a country of our size and stature down to limits where it starts being dangerous. I mean, here we are, we managed to get almost 20,000. Thank goodness. It would have been awful, wouldn't it, if we'd had those other measures implemented? We might have found that difficult.
We have 3 ex-military people here. What's your view?
I was going to ask a question, actually, of the 2 real ex-military people, which is, I mean, I remember being briefed on the Special Forces element of this 5 years ago. I mean, is 2 weeks long enough to actually get them trained and planned into the system?
The problem is, David, is that quite clearly deploying a brigade, and that's what this is. If you took every Gurkha in the army and sent him, it still wouldn't be enough to fulfil this commitment. It's quite expensive. And therefore ministers, you'll know better than I do, ministers have delayed until the last safe moment before pressing the button on something that's really going to cost a great deal of money.
7,500 were planned to do venue security. That is sort of checking cars, you know, being there as a visible sort of presence to help people, looking at handbags.
That's sort of straightforward.
Now that is actually increasing to 11,000.
Well, I tell you this, if I was an army veteran and I just risked my life in Helmand and come back here, and then I say, we'd like you to search handbags at the Olympics, I'd find that demeaning.
Yes, but that's the whole point, Andrew, isn't it? That you can say to these guys, scrap your leave,
and they'll do it.
Scrap all your other plans, you're not going on holiday, you'll lose your holiday.
Get some free Olympic tickets and that's it.
Better people than I am.
And I tell you, do it, but you'll do it with a smile.
You'll do it with a smile. You know, people seeing them will think how absolutely brilliant these men and women are.
Well, let's just hear Joe.
Yes, because I think, can we talk to Katie Rowlett, who's at the Olympic Park? Can you hear us, Katie?
I can, yes?
Yes, great. I mean, we've just been talking here in the studio about the 3,500 additional military personnel that are going to have to be deployed. One of the things that has been revealed is that G4S, in terms of their recruitment policy, they were given the contract in March last year, but didn't actually open the recruitment office until January this year. And they didn't leave enough time, did they?
No, they didn't. I mean, we've heard from a couple of people that are employed by G4S, and they applied last year and didn't hear from the company until April, I think. So they're doing handbag security on the gates of the Olympic Park. So there does seem to be some sort of issue arising about the administrative side of G4S.
Yes, I mean, looking now, the backdrop looks amazing. The weather is wonderful for once.
For today.
But, yeah, for today. But what is, in practical terms, what is the feeling around the Olympic Park with this happening just weeks before the opening?
I've been here this morning, obviously I didn't have entrance to the park, and it's kind of a hive of security activity. There's a lot of police presence, army personnel manning a lot of the entrance gates, as well as security people. So it does seem like there is a very large-scale security operation going on here. just seems a shame they've got an extra 3,500 needed in order to fulfil the whole of the Olympic sites.
Yes. Patrick, did you want to ask?
I think the point is this, that whilst we were writing the report, it became clear there was plenty of people out there who wanted to do it. People who, in many ways, had already been trained, some had been vetted, but the money that was being offered wasn't good, and the processing wasn't good for the recruiting either.
Well, I mean, and you know, as I say, if it hadn't actually started until January this year, that isn't enough time by anybody's standards, and that's just been revealed today.
Are the losers going to pay any penalties? Is anyone going to suffer for this?
Ask a minister.
I hope so. They should.
Or in the usual British way, no one's to blame?
Let's ask Katie. Katie, will there be any penalty, do you think, against G4S for failing to fulfil their contract, really?
I think there's been some rumours this morning that there may well be a penalty, yes. And the MOD have also said that they will be fully reimbursing any military personnel that are put out, say, have booked holidays and now have to cancel them, and they will get all of their leave entitlement as well. So as far as the military are involved, that are involved, they should get all their leave back.
These are MOD costs, and actually I know there's been an agreement already on that 30,500. So the MOD are paying money for Olympic security, and the MOD, as we know from having seen, have got no money, and I think that is outrageous.
Patrick, you're looking perplexed.
Well, we're going to get soldiers getting overtime, are we, as a result of this? I don't think so. Not a bit of it.
No.
They'll have no local overseas allowance, none of their Afghan allowances.
When will they stay in London?
I would imagine they'll probably live in bivouacs.
Well,
I don't know.
there's accommodation being up in Hayden Wise, I think, for 3,500, which was built by GS4, but it's not very good accommodation. I mean, these guys are
Well, I
going...
tell you, our army will be used to that.
Yeah.
They're used to it. Very good. Yeah. All right. Any of you watch 2020? You know, that sitcom?
I love it. Love it.
Well, I mean, this is worse than anything they've done on 2020. Katie, thank you very much. Nice to talk to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Gentlemen, thank you as well.
It does look nice, doesn't it, for once?
Looks
The
very
weather,
nice.
yes. Now, David Cameron hasn't exactly had a trouble-free time of late. Sorry about the talking in the background. And most of the heavy flack seems to have come from, well, his own side. Backbenchers are in rebellious mood, as this week's shenanigans over Lords reform amply proved. But that was just the latest in a long line of issues where Tory MPs have got bolshy and not always over policy. So what's ailing Dave's troops, and can he restore morale? Our Dave, David Thompson, found out.
Legend has it, Winston Churchill once advised a young Tory MP who referred to the Labour benches as the enemy. No, that is the opposition party. The enemy is sat all around you. These days, David Cameron must know exactly what the great man meant.
Lords reform, EU referendum, you get the drift. But it's not only policy. According to one of his most senior backbenchers, Conservative MPs are just not feeling the love.
There are two sides to management, senior management. One is to point your troops to the battle, to set the objectives and to motivate people to achieve them. But the second is to notice when people are falling by the wayside and to put your arm around them, shed a tear of sympathy and say, how can I help? And that's one of the management skills that David Cameron doesn't lacks.
A wise man, not Churchill this time, once said, it's better to be feared than loved. David Cameron does have his heavies, the whips to you and me, to lean on backbenchers. So how's that working for him?
The old power that the whips had, which is all about people wanting to be promoted, can still work to a certain extent. But increasingly, MPs have been constituency champions in their local area. They're much more interested in what their constituents think, what their local associations think, than what the whips office might think. And that's really what's driving people's behaviour. They're local champions now.
So what, if anything, can David Cameron do to stop his backbenchers giving him a kicking?
He needs to bring on some of the new people, even though that's going to be very difficult because there are older people who are waiting their turn. But you know, he needs to get them in, and he needs to get them involved really pretty quickly, and use their talents and get them to help him along the road.
But even that suggestion is not without dangers.
This whole business of quotas, I know it's not called quota, but it is quota, wanting more people of a particular gender or particular background in his frontline team seems to me to be wrong. you put the best people in the best jobs, and that's another lacking of management skills. And many people in there feel that no matter what they do, their chance will never come, and that's causing concern too.
And some think that what Team Cameron really needs is a few more people a bit less like him.
I want David Cameron to take in to create a big tent where everybody's involved in the project, but sadly people are being left behind. And there is a feeling, just a feeling, that the people being left behind are people who are not quite from his background.
Coming under not-so-friendly fire from the backbenches isn't unique to this PM. Just ask Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, John Major, or even Winston. The difference for David Cameron, sometimes it feels like it's personal.
David Thompson reporting there. So, David Davis, is Mr Cameron's current problems, are they rooted in his policies or his personality?
Well, structure as much as anything else. I mean, it's the way the policies are arrived at. A lot of the backbenchers on the Conservative side feel that the Liberals, which are 1/6 of the government, have almost half the say. I mean, that's part of the problem. The quad is 2 Liberals, 2 Tories, you know. So part of that. Part of it's just organisation. I mean, I'm afraid the government hasn't done enough to make their own backbenchers feel involved, engaged in the policy and so on. So, you know, this week's issue on the Lords shouldn't have been a surprise. I mean, this, you know, the opponents to the Lords reform have been coming for a long time. There are 110 of them. How can you not notice those? So there's a whole series of things behind it, really. It's not one single thing. Some of it's not unique either, as you just heard. John Major had much bigger troubles. Even Margaret Thatcher had big troubles from time to time. So.
I spoke to someone from the US State Department whose job it is to keep an eye on British politics, and they were over visiting and they spoke to a number of Conservative backbenchers, and they said to me at the end of it, they said they were amazed how little support or warmth there was for David Cameron on the Tory backbenches.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, he wouldn't be the first person to say it, and a lot of people have written it up. And yeah, but he's got to be fair to him, he's got a difficult knife edge to walk along to deal with the Liberals and to deal with his own side. But what's been surprising, I guess, is how little care has been put into managing a party when you haven't got the normal baubles you can hand out. You know, you can't give ministerial posts because 20-odd of those have gone. You can't, you know,
Sure, but has he dealt with
patronage these days is less than it used to be.
Has he dealt with the Lib Dems better than he's dealt with his own backbenches?
Well, I suspect that's what the feeling is in the Tory benches. I mean, for example, when the coalition agreement was first signed up, the Liberals actually had a vote on it. You know, it was not put to the Tory.
No, they had several votes on it. They had this double lock or triple lock
to go through, and so there's a feeling, to some extent, I think, that it's more their property than ours. Also, frankly, ministers talk about the coalition agreement as though it's got some sort of constitutional gravitas. It is just a deal between the leaders of the parties. And so this week, for example, it hasn't got the standing. You grimace at me, but it hasn't got the standing of a manifesto. A manifesto is approved by the people. The coalition agreement's approved by who, precisely? As it turns out, just the leaders of the parties. So when you're doing something like the Lords, frankly, you can't claim the same rights as a leader as you could if it was explicitly laid out in your manifesto.
Are Tory backbenchers right to think that if you're not from the right set, you don't get into the Cameron government?
I think we'll only know the answer to that question after the reshuffle comes, how he deals with it. And in your VT, there were people really sort of hinting at that. Paul Goodman was hinting at it. Brian Binley was hinting at it. Now, I happen to think Goodman's wrong.
People being left behind are people who are not quite from his background. That is a remarkable thing for a Tory MP to say of a Tory Prime Minister in the 21st century.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. It will show. The first time around, he had to do a reshuffle, not reshuffle, he had to create a government in very short order on terms he wasn't expecting as a part of a coalition. This time, he's had time to think about it, and we will see what the outcome is. I mean, there's a great risk in it. If I were him, I'd actually put off the reshuffle for a long time. But there's a great risk in it, because the moment he does it, lots of people, maybe the Binleys of the world, will say, well, actually, we told you so, or they'll feel left out, or for whatever reason, they'll be irritated by it. And what Brian Binley was talking about, of course, was this feeling that, you know, you've got to be a woman or a minority group or something like that in order to get promoted. I don't think that's quite as strong as it's claimed, but, you know, we'll see.
The original coalition agreement that you've been talking about is kind of run its course in a way. They've either done what they've agreed they would do, or they're unable to do what they've agreed what they do. There used to be talk that there would be a sort of 2.0 coalition agreement. There'd be the next stage. Am I right in thinking that's gone now? That's not going to happen because there's actually not much they can agree on.
It looks like it's gone. On Wednesday, Adam Afria almost asked that in terms and basically got gently pushed back. You know, and Afria is one of the people, actually, he ought to be in government. He's a talented young man, very capable young businessman. Actually, he
built his own business. He actually knows how to run a business.
Knows how to run a business. He's a scientist by training. All the sorts of things you'd expect to be in the government.
What about a minority government? Are there feelings amongst Tory MPs that, on the basis of that question, if there isn't much you can agree on, what about looking at...
And will we get there sooner rather than later?
A lot of them think that will be what the last year will look like. I don't believe either. I don't believe either of that. Look, I mean, the Liberals have got the best seats on this aeroplane and no parachutes. They can't get out. But
they could agree to go to a minority government, leaving the Tories as a minority government, but not provoke an election.
Yes.
Yeah, but
two things are not the same.
What sort of government will we deliver under those circumstances? I mean, what happens, for example, to the fiscal rebalancing programme? The major part of the cuts.
Agree with it,
the major part of the cuts come in the second half. What is it? What are the things that are hitting the Liberals? Tend to be cutting back on spending. Tuition fees was driven by that. All those sorts of things are going to be political poison to the Liberals. So if they're going to pull back out of government and give up the benefits of government, they're not going to be delivering the price.
Let me take you on to laws reform, which of course has become sort of casus belli in the coalition now. David Cameron floating the idea that, well, maybe we could pare back a bit. Let's get rid of the 92 hereditaries and let's elect another 92 people in their place as a first stage. Is there any of that kind of ducking and diving, compromising going to work?
I doubt it. I mean, you never know. They're going to take 3-6 months over this and try and pick off people and say, well, what little tweak would you like, and so on. But, you know, there are 110. 110 rebels, in order for them, and there are probably more now. Now he's effectively said, I'm only going to have one more go. There may be
Why
others
not rebel?
There may be others who join up. But, you know, you've got to get down to under 70 for him to have a chance of winning. Can't see it, really.
Why not just get rid of the 92 hereditaries and not replace them? There are over 800 people in the Lords anyway.
David Steele put down a motion which actually we could pass on block tomorrow.
Which was?
It includes also retirements, criminals get thrown out, and all the sorts of things that come.
How many would that be?
Quite a lot. It could be down to 200 before the end of the year.
You'll have to get a Lord on to talk about that.
You're enjoying your rebellious years.
I'm enjoying my freedom.
You've come late to them.
I'm enjoying my freedom. No, I started out like this, you have to remember.
You come full circle.
I do. Right.
OK, it's seen by some as an attempt to refloat David Cameron's big society idea. England and Wales's 2,000 miles of canals and rivers today handed over from a quango to a shiny new charity, the Canal and River Trust. Ministers say it's a major milestone in its programme to reform quangos. But can it keep its head above water? Ha-ha. Earlier, I asked our correspondent, John Maguire, to explain the background.
Well, of course, we've got generations and generations of history in our canals, initially set up, created to fuel the Industrial Revolution, to transport goods around, now purely a leisure pursuit. Millions and millions of people come and use the canals in England and Wales every year, and we are talking about England and Wales. Scotland will stay under public ownership, but what's happening under this deal is that ownership will, and the responsibility for the waterways transfers now to the trust, to a specially formed Canals and River Trust, away from what was previously British Waterways. It'll mean, from the trust's point of view, that it's got a secured income from the government for the next 15 years. £800 million has been handed over by the government. That'll cover the overheads. The rest of things, the charity status, recruiting volunteers, any money it can make from its commercial exploits here on the water, that'll give the trust the rest of the money it needs to run the canals. It's not just the wet bits, of course, but historic buildings such as this. It takes it almost into the league of the National Trust, really, on a much, much smaller scale, but it will become the third largest owner of historic buildings in the UK after the Church of England and the National Trust.
So what has been the political motivation for this?
You've got to look at this, I suppose, as a pure example of the big society. What was formerly British Waterways, an agency of the government, must have thought we can't secure our income for years to come. So it was their decision, almost like a management buyout, really, to go to the government and to say, what if we took control of everything, we ran things ourselves? With that guaranteed income for the next 15 years in England and Wales, we're only talking about England and Wales, Scotland stays under public ownership, but with that guaranteed income, it means that they know that their maintenance costs, of course, so much history here, expensive, difficult to maintain if you like, is covered. They then can decide how they want to grow the business, grow the charity in the future. It brings their destiny under their own control. And what they're doing today is they're launching an appeal for thousands of volunteers right across England and Wales to take part in 50 projects to rejuvenate, especially the towpath. So many people come here for leisure. We've seen boats here this morning, people jogging, people walking their dogs. The idea is to try and get some of those people to put their money where their mouth is, put their effort where their mouth is, if you like, and to help out to be part of the big society plans for the waterways in England and in Wales.
On a day like this, you're bound to encourage more volunteers. Looks like a perfect occasion for messing about on boats. Thank you very much. All messing about in the studio. Well, we've been joined by the Environment Minister, Richard Benyon, and by the poet Ian Macmillan, who supports the change. Welcome to both of you. Richard Benyon, so far, so is this the big success story for the big society?
Well, it's massive. There's nothing new about the big society. What the government is doing is making it easier for people to volunteer, for people to get involved, and actually handing over this massive asset, which treasuries down the years have salivated over, £460 million worth of assets. This is being handed back to the people who know, use and love these waterways, and it's a great moment.
And it's a great idea, especially listening to the way you've put it now. But what about the money, the streams of money? Literally, where will they come from once the government money dries up?
We had really tough negotiations with the charity trustees, and the words used at the end of it was had been agreed was tough but fair. The government is putting in a lot of money.
How much?
£39 million is a basic core funding amount. We're dealing with the pensions entitlements, and many other aspects of the funding have been sorted for the long term as well.
15 years.
Yes, I mean that is a very long time.
Long term,
well, it's a very long term in terms of government spending, government commitments, and this is, as you say, 2,000 miles of canals. This is a really exciting moment when we've actually handed something that the public should own back to them.
Are you excited, Ian?
I am, because it seems to me that as a poet what canals remind us of is collectivism and interconnectedness. So they were the first kind of information superhighway, and if we can get our hands on them, then we can somehow connect with each other. Somehow it can remind us of the great industry that built it, and that if we can move that along a little bit, then that'll be a great thing. It just reminds us that collectivism is a great thing.
But will those people actually put hands to the pump in that sense?
The thing is, they already get a lot of canal enthusiasts who can't wait to get the wellies on. The next bit is the ones in stilettos and brogues who should be convinced to get the wellies on. So perhaps it should be a kind of free welly amnesty.
Well, maybe anything, I'm sure, any gimmick to get people down to help. I mean, looking at the canals there, they do look wonderful, peaceful, different pace of life. But in terms of the volume of people who are actively engaged, I mean, does it actually involve that many people?
Probably not, but I think the thing is, if we can see it on days like this, as you say, if we can see how they can connect people, somehow a canal feels a bit like a library with water, doesn't it? So we can get people excited about libraries, we can get people excited about canals. It's when you try and get people excited about picking rubbish on the streets, that's the hard thing.
Have you been on a canal boat holiday?
I've been on a holiday, but I've been on canal boats many times. As a poet, I often stroll by, getting inspired.
I see.
People shout from
I think people are more likely to volunteer for an organisation that's a charity that they feel a sense of public ownership rather than a government body.
And there's already a core. I mean, in my part of the world, the Pocklington Canal
Is there?
It was run by volunteers.
So you are confident that would happen? Because the thing is, you say that people will want to get involved. We've got, massive charities that people are involved in. This will be yet another one. We have the National Trust. People have, local causes that they're involved in. It could look like a money-saving exercise on the government side and relying on people to take up the slack.
I don't think the Treasury would agree, as we've just handed over, hundreds of millions of pounds worth of assets. I think that it is, everywhere I go, David's absolutely right, huge enthusiasm, passion, not just from boaters. I mean, I mean, I caught my first pike in the Kennet and Avon Canal when I was 9 years old. I know the passions that that exist on canals.
Do you have a licence?
Probably not.
You know, hands up. I don't think I did.
Yeah, that'll come back to you. You'll regret saying that.
If
Now,
there
listen,
are
I've
any
got...
police left, they'd come and arrest you.
I've got to ask you briefly about flash flooding. I mean, calls from the opposition for the government to actually put their hands in their pockets and supply more cash to those hit areas. Are you going to do it?
Well, we have a scheme now which called the Bellwyn scheme, which kicks in when local authorities are hit. We're prepared to
But they've been hit way beyond what you would have planned.
And they will receive money under the Bellwyn scheme. And you know, we want to make sure, you know, places like Hebden Bridge, it's just you know,
been devastated.
Many of us have visited there since the first floods. Now they've been flooded again, and you know, we want to make sure that they're getting every help they can. I was really impressed by the local working, and we want to make sure the government is doing its bit alongside the local efforts that are being made.
Do you think we're going to have to get used to more flash flooding, and you're going to have to dramatically change the way that we deal with it?
We know that climate weather patterns are changing. You know, we just faced two of the driest winters, and we were staring down the barrel of a drought gun this summer. Now we've been facing 3 months of, you know, really horrendous rain. I'm not saying it's going to be quite as extreme as that, but yes, we have to plan for this kind of weather patterns to continue, and we've got to make sure that government carries on doing what it's supposed to, which is building flood defence schemes, and that's what we're doing, spending £2.17 billion on that, and helping out where we can when these emergencies occur. And you know, I think the response has been good, but you know, most of the people who have flooded, you could not stop the torrent of water that they faced.
Thank you both very much.
Just before, on the canals, are the public paths on each side of the canal, are they a public right-of-way?
They are part of this deal, the towpaths. And
so there'll be no tolls put up for us to walk along the canals?
No. And actually this morning...
Is that right? They are public rights-of-way?
Yes, and we want to see them wider, so cyclists and walkers can...
Oh, you heard him say it, so we'll know who to come to for forecast.
Send your bills to Mr. Benyon.
Exactly, and he'll send you a fish back instead.
The pike.
Now, as we covered earlier in the programme, security is right at the top of the agenda at the moment. The Olympics are posing a massive challenge to the security services and shining a spotlight on the tools government has to keep us safe. Just how effective are they? Last week, a suspected terrorist was charged with breaching conditions imposed as part of the government's new terror monitoring powers. This is believed to be the first time someone has breached the so-called TIPIM. They're calling into question whether the system really is working. Now, TIPIMs are terrorist prevention and investigation measures. They replaced control orders earlier this year as the system for dealing with terrorist suspects who cannot be tried or deported. People who are subject to a TIPIM can be electronically tagged, and restrictions can be placed on who they can meet and where they can go. Unlike control orders, though, TIPIMs are time-limited to 2 years. Some critics say that TIPIMs are no more than control orders light, L-I-T-E. They still place restrictions on the freedoms of people who've not been charged with an offence. So we're joined now to discuss this by Robin Simcox from the Henry Jackson Foundation, who writes about Al-Qaeda and other terrorists. And David Davis, you're still against TIPIMs. Are you against them because they're still too draconian or not draconian enough?
I'm against them because, one, they corrupt our legal system because they're done on a civil basis rather than criminal basis, and two, because they don't work. This is not the first occasion like this has happened. I mean, this man went there 5 times before he was pulled up. I mean, Lord knows what he was doing. But another one under the previous control orders got to within 10 foot of Jack Straw and Dominic Grieve without being, until he announced himself. Nobody knew who he was. So again, they don't work. They're completely misnamed. They're not control orders or control orders light. They're uncontrolled or out of control orders. So we corrupt our system, and we have a system that doesn't work.
What would you say to that?
I think nobody would say that these are a perfect, ideal system, but I think, unfortunately, the best we have. Remember, this is something that came about because detention, deportation, prosecution, control orders weren't seen as acceptable, so we're left with basically what we could get through legally. Now, with some of these people, the individual that Mr. Davis mentioned that got within 10 foot, after he was released from his control order eventually, after a big civil rights campaign on his behalf, he ended up back in Afghanistan and killed in a US missile strike in 2010. So it actually proves the point that these are some extremely, extremely serious individuals. And the man that breached the Olympic security, by the way, he wouldn't be there at all if control orders were still in place, because originally he was under a relocation order. He should have been in Norwich. It's only when the TPIMs came back and we lost the power to relocate that this individual moved back to London.
Let's get the facts right. First off, the person who was killed in Afghanistan was one of 7 who walked away from control orders. Wasn't released, he absconded under a control order.
Even though he was still under the order.
Supposedly under control order.
Left
the country. Secondly, you said the reason was done because because prosecuting them was wrong. Absolutely the opposite of the case. We said we should be prosecuting them, putting them in prison. Then they couldn't walk around either near leading politicians or into the Olympic Park. Hopefully, the problem, in fact, was brought about because the government said we couldn't deport people. Actually, not one of the people on control orders at the moment is subject to deportation at all. They're all British citizens. We've taken one problem and created a mechanism and use it for something completely different, because our whole strategy with respect to terrorism doesn't use prosecution enough, doesn't use the evidence we have in the form of intercept data, doesn't do the job it's supposed to do. I've just been talking to an American FBI agent just before I came here. They put theirs in prison. We put ours under control order.
Robin Simcox.
Well, first of all, everyone would say prosecution is definitely the best way of doing it.
So we should do it.
So ideally if we can, but they did do a review into every single control order case, and not a single case at that time they said could have prosecuted if intercept evidence was allowed. Now the Americans do prosecute more.
Who did the review?
It was a government review, of course.
It was the agency review.
The Americans do prosecute more, but, I mean, America also places a lot more, for example, FBI agents undercover, and they have plea bargaining. Now, would we be happy with that as an alternative? It's not as if we've got exactly the same legal system in the UK and the US. There's a lot of different things that are going on here.
Is it your position, David Davis, though, that there should be nothing in between walking free without any kind of control at all and prosecution? Nothing in between.
For British citizens, I think prosecution is the be-all and end-all. And I'm afraid the government arguments on this are just plumb wrong on interception. You go and talk to the Department of Justice, as I have. You talk to the Australians, you talk to the New Zealanders, you talk to the Canadians. They all say, you don't use intercept evidence? They clean up every single trial on terrorism in the United States, and pretty much most of the trials on organised crime, using intercept tapes, all of them. And you can't do it without that. They couldn't actually clean up the mafia in North America until they introduced the laws that allowed them to use both RICO and intercept tapes. And now they do it. We should be doing it here. We shouldn't be so prissy about it. If we weren't so prissy about it, we wouldn't have to corrupt our whole legal system into something that comes straight out of Kafka.
Do you side with the security services when they say they don't want intercept material to be used? Because I think that is still their position.
Well, no, they don't. I'm not privy to the security service of thinking. I mean, it's one of those things where, to an extent, I believe if that's what they say, and they say it would weaken the security system, perhaps. I mean, I think
why do our people say that, though, when the Americans and the Canadians, the Australians don't?
There's different legal structures, and if you look at the government review, they say that they did a lot of models where they tried to place intercept evidence into the British legal system. They said it wouldn't work. Now, that is their position on it, but it comes back to the point as well. They did look at every case with control orders, and they tried to place intercept evidence. They used their intercept evidence. They came back every time and said it wouldn't lead to prosecution.
Do you know who Lord Lloyd is? Do you know who Lord Lloyd? Lord Lloyd used to be the intercept commissioner, the man who knows this system backwards and forwards. And just recently, he moved a private member's bill in the House of Lords to try and bring intercept into court. The man who knew most about it, more about anybody else, thinks we should bring it back. The people who don't are the people who got an interest in not going to court. They got an interest basically in disruption rather than conviction. And I'm afraid it's the wrong approach. It's bad for British security, and we should get a hand of it straight away.
But is there any chance of it actually happening?
Well, it might be. I think it's going to be revisited again this year. The committee that's dealing with it is still sitting, it's still going on. And they very, very nearly recommended the use of intercept, and then they had a last-minute scare on a Finnish case. But it may well happen, and it would allow us to cut back on all these other silly things that bring us into disrepute.
Rob Simcox, I'll give you the final word.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think if we're going to wait to solve this evidence just on waiting for intercept evidence to come in, we're going to be in for a long wait. There's very real and necessary security threats we need to deal with today, and that's why TPIMs, I think, are still a useful measure.
Right. Ms. Simcox, thanks for being with us. Joe.
Yes. Now, just over 65% of us made the trip to the polling station at the last election. That's down from a high of 83% in the 1950 election, and it seems young people are the least likely to vote. Research suggests almost 2/3 of 18-year-olds have little trust in politicians. Radio 1's Newsbeat programme took some young people to meet the Conservative MP Louise Mensch, Labour's Lisa Nandy, and the President of the Liberal Democrats, Tim Farron, to see what exactly they made of politics and politicians.
My name's Kay, I'm 22, I'm from South West London. I'm basically just here just to know why MPs don't care about young people unless it's election time.
I'm Nicola, I'm 20, I'm from Glasgow, and I want to know why you think you should be trusted after the expenses scandal.
I'm Michael, I'm 19, I'm from Portsmouth, and I'm here because I didn't vote because I felt it would have been for who I hated least rather than who I liked most. Well, I was just about to become a student, and I would have paid the lower fees, and now I've left, I'm going back again, I've now got to pay up to £9,000, which I don't think is fair at all.
Your generation is the least likely to vote, your age group. You're the least likely to get involved, you're the least likely to contact.
You've got to wonder why that is.
And I agree with you, but I also say there is a responsibility for young people to get in touch with us, to get involved. The public perception out there and the perception with young people is you guys are all the same, you all fiddled your expenses, you've all got these cushy gold-plated pension deals, and they have not taken on board any of the reforms that happened.
A lot of young people voted in the last election because of the tuition fees, because the Lib Dems said they wouldn't put them up, and then they totally U-turned on that. Do you not think that's put a lot of first-time voters the last time off of voting the next time?
That's well, I'm the Lib Dem.
Yeah,
I mean, OK, well, I'll put my hand up and say I rebelled, so I voted to not increase tuition fees. But I think Louise put her finger on it in terms of compromise. I mean, when was the last time any of you had to make a, or were able to make a perfect decision?
The young people felt really strongly about.
Yeah.
I would say that one of the problems with this job, and I've certainly found it in the last 2 years, is that we spend so much time here in this building. It means that I spend the vast majority of the week with the same slightly strange bunch of people, no offence guys, and very, very little time actually with the people that I represent. I think that's one of the reasons that politicians get out of touch so quickly.
So you're calling them strange yourself.
Yeah.
So imagine how people, and you're an MP, and you're calling all the other MPs strange. So imagine how young people feel.
I actually think we should, I agree completely with Lisa, we should rebalance it so all MPs can have a chance to spend more time in their constituency. It would really, really help.
I think you have to do a lot more to try and change your image, rather than just coming in and saying, oh no, we're a different lot. So if you want to change the image that people have, I think you've got a lot more to do.
Well,
David Davis. I'm doing the interview.
Sorry.
Apathy. Actually, I can't be bothered. So I just so bored, can't be bothered. Young people don't vote. What's new? They've never voted. They don't vote anywhere.
You're quite right. I mean, when you and I were student politicians, we had trouble getting them out to vote.
Yeah.
So
they grow into it.
There is a bit of that.
They're interested in politics.
There is a bit of that.
They're interested in politics.
But it's an extreme example of what's happening throughout the whole population. That is, number of people voting is going down.
Yes. In Britain.
In Britain, and quite
not
serious.
In France. 80% turnout in the French presidential election.
And why? Because there was a really big difference between the candidates, and that's what at the end of the day what makes the big difference is if this candidate's over here and this candidate's over here, and they're having a real argument, it's an exciting argument, very distinctive viewpoints, then there's a reason to go vote. If you think they're broadly the same, or, as, frankly, during the Tony Blair years, you thought they were going to win anyway, which is the other problem, then maybe you just don't bother to get up, you stay and watch Coronation Street.
But since we didn't know who was going to win the last election, it was quite close, right down to the last. And of course, nobody did win it in the end. Weren't you surprised that the turnout wasn't higher?
Actually, I was. I was for two reasons. I was because that there was a challenge and it was a real turning point or potential turning point, but also because we had the debates, and they were actually quite good. I mean, you know,
well, and they were watched by a lot of people.
When we were watching the first one, my family had a sweepstake on how soon I would leave the room, you know, and I actually sat right through to the end. I was quite surprised at myself, and I suspect I'm pretty typical in that respect. That I don't find it terribly exciting, but they were very good debates, and they didn't galvanise people to turn out. So that bit I don't know, but I think the lack of difference, the lack of idealism is the problem. We've got too much managerial politics today.
Well, the research from this university says most young people, 63%, are at least interested in politics, even if they don't vote. And I'm told that even some of them, if they get out of bed in time, watch this programme.
No, well, there you go. What I want to know is, are MPs a strange breed?
Of course they are.
Maybe that's why people don't vote.
They always have been, though.
That's also
what was normal about Winston Churchill?
That's also
You've got
true.
consistency. Hands up if you're a real political anorak. David Davis?
Yeah.
Andrew? Well, if you think of yourself as a top political nerd, you should be interested in the next item, because this morning the Electoral Commission has published its report on the way election counts are organised, and what happens next will decide the fate of the traditional all-night election night. And yes, staying up into the small hours to enjoy scenes like these.
So tired of waiting.
As soon as one predicts something in this particular election, somebody goes and very contrarily does the reverse. Good. I was just sort of looking at some of these results. This Wedgwood Ben result is really a very good one for him.
Just half a dozen results or so to come throughout London and the South East. Now I'm going to hand you back to David Dimbleby.
And I think that about wraps it up for this morning. So, a fourth Conservative term with a substantial majority is in prospect. Peter.
Well, it is, as John Soper was saying, not a particularly uplifting time for the Liberal Democrats. 1979, Mrs Thatcher beat Jim Callaghan. David?
Now there's the...
And just, I'm going to interrupt you there because Labour now have 324 seats, which gives them victory and a guaranteed third term.
We ought to have a look at Big Ben once more and just see how things are on the Tower of Big Ben at 4 minutes to 5 in the morning. Well, it has to be sorted out soon because the country can't afford just not to have a government for a week or more while people dither around and talk to each other.
Everybody feeling warm and nostalgic in the studio. So is the traditional election night experience safe? Well, we've been joined by Alex Robertson from the Electoral Commission and by Jonathan Isaby, Political Director of the Taxpayers Alliance. Welcome to the programme. Can I start with you, Alex? I mean, pressure from returning officers to count the next day, or certainly from some of them. What are you saying today?
What we've been doing over the last few months is talking to returning officers who are responsible in law for conducting elections, and we've been talking to politicians and broadcasters. And there are a number of different elections that take place now, sometimes often on the same day. And we don't think there's any single right answer for all of them, although we do think for a general election that the default should be overnight counting. We're very clear about that. What we're saying is that for all elections, though, returning officers should consult with politicians and broadcasters locally. They should do that early. They should make a decision by the end of January for an election in early May. They should make the reasons for their decision public, and we think that will lead to both the right decision being arrived at and also a degree of consensus.
So you're going to persuade them basically to count overnight, hoping the pressure will actually bear fruit?
Well, it's that dialogue, I think, locally with politicians and broadcasters, which I think will lead to the right outcome being reached out. But for a general election, we are clear that the default should be overnight counting.
Does that satisfy you?
I'm very pleased the Electoral Commission have decided that a default for overnight counts for general elections is the right thing to do. In a previous life, before the last general election, I ran a campaign called Save General Election Night, because there are a lot of returning officers who were talking about counting on the Friday, which struck me as a retrograde step because more and more counts were happening on the Thursday night. And frankly, if people have taken the trouble to vote, then the votes should be counted.
But does it matter, bearing in mind, quite a lot of people sleep probably once they've voted and don't sit up all night, and isn't this just about having a good television programme, which may be justifiable in itself?
I think you're rather on...
Yeah, well,
I think
trying to do us out of a job.
I'm with her, I agree.
I think you were unfair in the introduction, actually, because it's not just political nerds. I think it's the one time every 5 years where there's this kind of national carnival of democracy, if you like, where people do sit around the television and watch the results coming in and feel part of that democratic process.
Aren't you heading for a car crash, though? If you're going to get more counts coming together on one night, mistakes are going to be made. I mean, let's have a look, you know, ahead to the next general election. You know, we could have constituencies with new boundaries. We could have House of Lords reform. I grant you not looking too hopeful about it, but we could have. You could be electing Lords. There'll be local elections. I mean, how are they going to manage it all?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, the important thing is that the result is both accurate and timely, and there isn't going to be one answer in all circumstances.
Accurate probably is the key.
I mean, some of the issues that came through from talking to returning officers is, in some circumstances, particularly if you've got large geographical constituencies, it isn't going to be sensible to try and bring votes. Sometimes, look at this kind of northwest of Scotland by boat and even by helicopter together in one place.
But the Western Isles do it. The Western, Nahelan and Yar, should I say, count on the night. They helicopter the votes between the
yes,
islands.
and Sunderland, as everybody always points out, always does it in, what, 40 45 minutes or something like that. But that's because they throw resources at it. It's a small constituency. You can't roll that out across the rest of the nation, can you?
No, you look, over the last 50 years, more and more counts happened on the night. And indeed, last time, Northern Ireland, for the first time, counted on the Thursday night, having previously had to do it on the Friday for security reasons. So that was a brilliant step forward. Certainly the full position should be that everyone counts on the night and that we can hopefully find out by first thing on the Friday morning who the Prime Minister is.
Well, although first thing on the Friday morning, I mean, quite a lot of the counts aren't coming in until, at least halfway through the Today programme. So, I mean, would a few more hours make that much difference? I mean, you know, if you started on the Friday and get all the results instead of it, you know, coming through...
But if you counted on the Friday, you wouldn't have that shared experience of people following the results coming in, because most people during the Friday would be at work or looking after kids or doing something else.
What do you think?
I'm prejudiced. I used to have a next day count, and it was terrific, because I could watch everybody else suffer all night.
Well, and you got a good night's sleep.
I got a good night's sleep eventually, but no, I think actually, I agree. The sooner the better, generally.
But it's still in law, returning officers can, you know, make the decision themselves. They can't be forced, can they, to do overnight counts?
It's their decision, and they need to make sure there's an accurate result, and generally as soon as practical afterwards. You might remember, and the campaign actually that Jonathan was involved in resulted in a change in the law ahead of the general election, and that meant they had to provide a reason if they weren't going to start counting the votes within 4 hours of the close of poll.
Just finally, before we stop, would it be sensible, do you think it would be sensible to hold a national referendum on something like Europe on the same day as the general election?
I think back to the recommendations we're making, you need to look at each particular set of elections on their own merits. And actually, we did that looking at the UK-wide referendum last May, which took place at the same time as elections in Northern Ireland, Wales and Scotland. And we decided it was more important to get those results announced and out of the way, and then we counted the results for the UK-wide referendum at 4 o'clock the following day. So it won't always be the same answer.
In a word, no.
Yes, exactly.
No.
That was no, wasn't it?
It was not no, it was you need to look at it.
All right,
very
OK.
carefully.
And I certainly think that people should have a vote on Europe before the next general election.
It's all right, well, that gave you the chance to get that in, yeah?
They'll never shut them up. This next item is called The Screamer. Some of you have been in touch to ask if we could replay a rather splendid little highlight from yesterday's Prime Minister's questions. And as humble public servants, we are only too happy to oblige.
Sitting in front of her.
It was a question from Tory MP called Anne-Marie Morris. Just cop a whack at this.
This government has a great record on educational reform. Given the huge success of the University Technical College Initiative, creating over 25, will the Prime Minister please confirm he will support a further round of applications this autumn and that funding is available so that businesses, universities, parents and young people in Devon...
What's the point of the sling if you're going to whack your arm around like that? You were right. We saw you right in front. How's your hearing?
Oh, I've got... what? It was incredibly loud close up. Much louder than it sounds on there. Absolutely incredibly loud.
What was she saying?
I don't know. But, but you're right. I was worrying about the sling. I was watching her sort of waving.
Hitting James
Gray. She was
Gray,
breaking her arm again or something. So it was something else. It was quite a drama, but I don't think anybody heard the question.
Will she live that down? I mean, that's going to haunt her, isn't it?
Oh, I don't know. No, I think actually people have affection for that. I mean, it was done with some passion. You can do almost anything in the House of Commons if you do it with passion.
Well, if her arm wasn't broken before, it sure is now after that. We've got time for the quiz now?
Yes, we have. We've just got time before we go to find out the answer to our quiz. According to the MOD, what were the possible reasons for UFO visits? A, military reconnaissance, B, scientific exploration, or C, tourism? David, as a keen UFO studier.
Yeah, as you might think, yeah, military reconnaissance.
Actually, it's all three.
Really?
All three?
It's all of them.
And some of them were asylum seekers.
I like the idea of tourism, though. And the military reconnaissance, I can kind of get...
Enough of this nonsense about UFOs. That's it for today. Thanks to all of our guests. Special thanks to David Davis being our guest of the day. Now, I'm going to be back at 11:25 tonight on BBC One with This Week. It's slightly earlier than usual, as there's no question time tonight. We keep on working, they don't. I'll be joined by Alan Johnson, Michael Portillo and their stripy shirts, plus Gloria Honeyford talking about care for older people, Matt LeBlanc's friend, Stephen Mangan, and Sky News' Adam Bolting.
What a lot to look forward to. Yeah, it is. And there'll be more tomorrow.
As well. Me.
I'll be back next
week. Me. Yeah, working.